Ever been dating someone, you think things are clicking, and then it's like they've been abducted by aliens?
Yeah, just gone.
Radio silence, profile gone, leaving you just completely going, what just happened?
Mhm.
In our age of constant connectivity, this disappearing act, this thing we call ghosting, it feels like it's almost become, well, routine, part of the dating landscape.
And that's exactly what we're unpacking today. We've got a really interesting set of sources to delve into this whole phenomenon.
Okay.
First, there's a Medium article. It's actually from back in 2017, but it really nailed down what ghosting is and argued against, it becoming socially acceptable.
Right, an early take.
Yeah. Then we've got a British Vogue piece from last year talking about a potential counter movement, this rise of anti-ghosting.
Interesting.
And we'll also be drawing on a really detailed article from Delta Psychology that looks at the psychology behind it, the impact. And finally, some insights from Mind by Design counseling on why dating apps sometimes, well, fail, and ghosting is a big part of that.
Right. So our mission today, this deep dive, is really to dissect ghosting. We want to understand its core definition, why it's so prevalent, the real emotional hit it has on people,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe if we're seeing any kind of shift in how society views it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What exactly are we talking about when we use the term ghosting?
Well, the Medium article, it actually pulls a definition from the digital oracle itself, Urban Dictionary,
Right. Natural.
which is, a pretty good starting point. It defines ghosting as the act of suddenly ceasing all communication with someone the subject is dating but no longer wishes to date.
Okay.
And the crucial part there is the implied intention. The person doing the ghosting, they're kind of hoping the other person will just get the hint without needing any actual explanation.
The silent treatment is a breakup method. And the author of that Medium piece, they don't pull any punches, right?
Mhm.
Calling it a cowardly act.
Not at all. Fueled by poor communication skills, immaturity is how they put it. And they also make it really clear this isn't a gender thing. Anyone can ghost, anyone can be ghosted.
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, is the mismatch, potentially, between what the ghoster thinks they're doing. Maybe they genuinely believe, oh, I'm sparing their feelings, and what actually happens.
Right.
The Medium author makes a really strong case that ghosting actually creates way more confusion. And in a way, it kind of diminishes the person being ghosted.
How so?
It sends this unspoken message, like the time you spent together, it was so insignificant, it doesn't even warrant a proper goodbye.
Oof. That is pretty harsh when you think about it. You're not just rejected, you're kind of erased,
Mm,
made to feel like you didn't even register.
exactly. So definitely not a consequence-free action.
For sure. Now, how common is this? Because it feels like almost everyone has a ghosting story these days.
You're absolutely right. It's surprisingly widespread. The Delta Psychology article, it throws out some pretty eye-opening statistics.
Mm.
They cite studies suggesting anywhere from like 13% to 23% of adults have been ghosted by a romantic partner specifically.
Okay, that's quite a chunk.
But if you broaden that out to include ghosting in any form, maybe friendships too, those numbers jump way up between 20% and 40%.
Wow.
And some research, believe it or not, indicates that maybe up to 72% of people have been on the receiving end at least once.
72%. That's a lot of people suddenly vanishing.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the shift, doesn't it? Was this always such a common way to end things, or is this really a sign of our modern times?
Well, the Delta Psychology article touches on the evolution of, how we communicate in dating, and it's quite insightful. Historically, ending things, even casually, usually meant some kind of direct communication.
Like a conversation.
Or a call. Exactly. A face-to-face chat, a phone call, maybe even a letter back in the day.
Mhm.
And social circles were often smaller, right? So just disappearing, it was harder. And it carried, well, more social consequences. There was a kind of built-in accountability.
That makes sense. If you lived in a smaller community, word would probably get around pretty fast if you just, poof,
Yeah.
cut someone off.
Precisely. But then you look at the 21st century, and technology has just fundamentally changed how we connect and, crucially, how we disconnect. The rise of texting, social media, and especially dating apps has made communication instant, often really informal. And ironically, these tools that help us find connections, they've also made it incredibly easy to just stop.
It's like the effort involved in ending things has been almost totally removed. Swipe right, chat, maybe meet up. and then swipe left into oblivion. It feels like that sometimes.
It does. The Mind by Design counseling piece talks about how dating apps, with their whole swipe culture, encourage these really quick, often superficial judgments, and it contributes to this feeling that relationships are almost disposable.
Disposable, yeah. That's a good word for it.
And the Delta Psychology article emphasizes this too. The constant stream of profiles, the ease of swiping, it leads to these quick, surface-level assessments. Connections feel more transient.
So if it's not instantly perfect.
Right. The perceived effort in just moving on to the next option is incredibly low. So ghosting, in that environment, it can seem like a seemingly painless way out. For the ghoster, at least.
And it's all happening through screens, isn't it? You don't have to see the other person's reaction, their hurt. That's huge.
It is. The Delta Psychology article even quotes a dating app user saying something like, "They are still just a profile to you, not a person. I don't feel the normal empathy I would." That really hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, it does. That lack of normal social cues, that dehumanization that can happen online, it definitely plays a part.
For sure. And like that Medium article noted way back in 2017, it was already becoming sort of okay for people to just vanish. It's almost like the digital distance creates an emotional distance too.
Okay, so we have a clearer picture of what ghosting is, how common it's become, and how technology has really greased the wheels for it. But let's dig deeper into the why. What are the underlying reasons people actually choose to ghost someone?
Yeah, the Delta Psychology article really breaks down the motivations, and one of the most common ones. Simply wanting to avoid conflict and uncomfortable conversations.
Ah, the classic avoidance.
Totally. Ending any kind of relationship, even a brief one, it can be awkward, right? And a lot of people who ghost admit they just dread that confrontation so much that disappearing feels, well, easier than explaining themselves. Silence seems less messy to them.
It's choosing the path of least resistance for themselves.
Yeah.
Even if it makes things way harder and more confusing for the other person.
Exactly. Another factor they point out is attachment styles.
Oh, interesting. How does that play in?
Well, people with an avoidant attachment style, who tend to be less comfortable with intimacy anyway, might just withdraw when a relationship starts feeling too close.
Okay, that makes sense.
But interestingly, people with an anxious attachment style, the ones who really fear rejection, they might also ghost.
Really? How come?
It can be like a preemptive strike. If they feel insecure or they sense rejection coming, they might end it first, abruptly, as a way to kind of protect themselves.
Wow. That's a fascinating and kind of unexpected angle. So it's not always just being uncaring. Sometimes it's rooted in their own deep anxieties. What else?
The grass is greener mentality is a big one, and that's definitely amplified by dating apps and social media, right? That constant stream of options.
Oh, yeah. The endless scroll.
Both the Delta Psychology article and the Mind by Design piece, which calls it the paradox of choice, talk about this. Seeing all these seemingly better alternatives can make you feel dissatisfied with who you're currently talking to. Makes it easier to just bail and see what else is out there.
Like we're constantly window shopping for partners, always thinking maybe something slightly better is just one more swipe away. Makes commitment feel, I don't know, temporary.
Very temporary. Then there's the psychological angle, cognitive dissonance, self-justification. Well, ghosting is hurtful, right? And to feel okay about themselves, people might rationalize it. They might tell themselves, oh, no explanation is actually less painful. Or, look, we only went on 2 dates. I don't really owe them anything, even if deep down they know it's not great.
Right. Rewriting the narrative in their head so they don't feel like the bad guy.
Exactly. And don't forget just the sheer volume of online interactions. Delta Psychology mentions decision fatigue, digital overload. That's real.
Like burnout from just managing all the chats.
Totally. Managing multiple conversations, potential dates, it can be exhausting. So sometimes someone might just stop responding out of sheer mental fatigue, not necessarily with a deliberate intent to hurt. It's more like dropping the ball because you're juggling too much.
Right. It's like having too many browser tabs open and your brain just crashes on a few. Except, these are people.
Precisely. And the Delta Psychology article does acknowledge that some ghosters might genuinely believe they are being kinder, weirdly, or maybe they feel pressured by stuff they haven't shared. They also mention destiny beliefs.
Destiny beliefs.
Yeah, the idea that relationships are either meant to be or they're not. If it doesn't feel like the one immediately, ghosting might seem like a natural, almost fated outcome.
Huh. Okay. So it's a complex mix of reasons then. Avoidance, anxiety, technology, overload, self-justification, Often probably a combination.
Definitely often a combination. But regardless of the why behind it, the impact on the person getting ghosted, that can be really, really significant.
Absolutely. Let's dive into that emotional impact. What does it actually feel like to be on the receiving end of that sudden silence?
Well, the Delta Psychology article paints a pretty stark picture. It starts with intense confusion and rumination.
It's going over and over it in your head.
Constantly. The abrupt silence leaves zero room for understanding. So your mind just races, replaying every single interaction, trying to pinpoint why, what did I do, what did I miss.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. This total lack of closure can lead to obsessive self-questioning, really chip away at your self-esteem. There's a quote from a communication researcher, Leah Lefevre, who says, ghosting leaves people with unanswered questions and in a constant loop of wondering what happened.
Like a puzzle with a huge piece just ripped out. You can't make sense of it.
Exactly. And it's not just confusion, right? There's real emotional pain involved.
Yeah, sure.
The article points out that social rejection actually triggers the same pathways in the brain as physical pain.
Wow, so it literally hurts.
It literally hurts. People report feeling deeply hurt, sad, angry, even humiliated. And in some ways, it can sting even more than a normal breakup because there's no reason given, no sense of finality. It's like your very presence was so unimportant you didn't even rate an explanation.
That feeling of being dismissed, just totally disregarded, that must be devastating.
It is. And then there's the anxiety that brews in that uncertainty, constantly checking your phone, wondering if maybe today they'll reply, swinging between hope and despair.
Ugh, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
That constant uncertainty must create so much stress.
Huge anxiety and stress. The article talks about phantom notifications. You think your phone buzzed, but it didn't. Just constantly checking. It's an emotional roller coaster. And it can definitely worsen existing mental health stuff, amplify feelings of worthlessness, helplessness.
And without a clear ending, moving on must be incredibly difficult. Like, how do you grieve something that never officially ended?
Exactly. It's like an open wound that just can't properly heal. The article uses the term ambiguous grief, which feels spot on.
Ambiguous grief. Yeah.
Unlike a clear breakup, there's no definitive endpoint to mourn. So it's incredibly hard to process the relationship, whatever it was, and actually move forward. You're stuck in this limbo, sort of oscillating between holding on to hope and trying to accept it's over. Closure is so, so crucial for emotional resilience, and ghosting just snatches that away completely.
It really sounds like this kind of experience can leave some pretty significant emotional scars. Could it impact how someone approaches future relationships too?
Oh, absolutely. Delta psychology points this out clearly. Many people who've been ghosted carry forward a fear of abandonment. They might develop what's called rejection sensitivity.
Meaning they're like hyper alert for signs of trouble.
Exactly. Hypervigilant for any tiny sign that a new partner might be withdrawing. Trust can be really hard to rebuild. They might put up emotional walls, to protect themselves.
Which is understandable, but could also make it harder to connect next time.
It's a tough cycle. Being ghosted can unfortunately lead to behaviors that might inadvertently push future potential partners away. It's a difficult thing to navigate.
Now, you mentioned earlier the younger generations seem to experience and maybe even do more ghosting. What are the broader cultural and generational takes on this?
Yeah, the Delta Psychology article has some interesting stats on that. Younger generations, Gen Z, younger millennials, they report significantly higher rates, both of being ghosted and of ghosting others.
Really, both sides.
Yeah. One survey found something like 84% of this group have been ghosted at least once. And then there's this thing called reciprocal ghosting.
What's that?
It's where people who've been ghosted then go on to ghost others. Around 67% admitted to doing it, maybe as a defense mechanism, or maybe they just feel like, well, that's how it's done now.
So it's almost become like normalized for some, just part of the dating game.
Yeah.
You mentioned younger people might see it as more acceptable sometimes.
That seems to be the case. Around 3 in 4 young people in one study thought ghosting was okay in certain situations, like after a really bad date, or if it was just a super brief connection.
Okay.
And nearly 2/3 admitted they had ghosted someone. This is quite different from older generations, older millennials, Gen X, boomers. They generally report lower rates, both experiencing and doing it, and tend to disapprove more. Probably because they grew up with different communication norms, pre-dating apps mainly. It really shows a generational shift in dating etiquette, or lack thereof, maybe.
What about gender? Is there a difference in who ghosts more?
The data's a bit mixed, honestly. Some studies suggest women might report ghosting slightly more often than men.
Any theories why?
Well, One possibility raised is safety concerns. Women might choose to just cut contact abruptly to avoid potential negative or even aggressive reactions from men.
Ah, okay. That makes sense as a possibility.
Yeah. And interestingly, some surveys found that women who ghost report feeling relief more often afterwards compared to men who ghost, maybe suggesting different motivations sometimes. But it's crucial to remember both men and women ghost, and both get ghosted. It happens across the board.
And culturally, does it very much around the world?
The Delta Psychology article touches on that. Cultural norms around directness and confrontation definitely play a role. In more individualistic cultures, like maybe the US or parts of Europe, where personal convenience is often high priority, ghosting might be more common, even if it's still seen negatively by many.
Yep.
In more collectivist cultures, where group harmony and saving face are really important, the reaction might be more complex. Ghosting could be seen as a way to avoid direct, potentially embarrassing confrontation, but it might also be frowned upon for not following social protocols.
But the hurt is probably universal.
The article emphasizes that, yeah, that feeling of confusion and rejection.
Yeah.
That seems to be a pretty universal human reaction, regardless of culture. Nobody enjoys being ghosted. And it's spreading, isn't it? Beyond romance.
Yeah, seems like it. Into friendships, even work stuff sometimes. This silent treatment is becoming a more common way to end connections we just don't want anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's circle back to technology for a second. We've touched on its role, but can we really dig into how it acts as this accelerant, as the Delta Psychology article puts it?
Absolutely. That sheer volume of potential partners on dating apps, the whole swipe economy, it's a massive factor.
Endless options.
Right. With so many profiles just a click away, each individual connection can feel less significant,
Yeah.
more easily replaceable. Delta Psychology mentioned ghosting is the rejection method on apps about a third of the time.
A third. Wow.
It really feeds that mindset of why bother with an awkward chat when I can just swipe on?
It's like we're treating potential partners like items in an online shopping cart, easy to add, easy to just delete without much thought. And the apps themselves, they have these built-in ways to disappear, don't they?
Yeah.
Unmatching, blocking. It's instant.
Totally instant. These platforms offer these incredibly convenient escape hatches. You can literally vanish from someone's digital life in seconds. There's no real-world social friction like there used to be.
Yeah.
And that feeling of anonymity or pseudo-anonymity and the reduced empathy we talked about, it just makes it psychologically easier to ignore a profile on a screen compared to a person you've actually met and talked to.
Yeah.
That quote about not treating everyone like a special butterfly, that really captures the depersonalization.
It really does. And then there's just the sheer volume, right? We're all managing so many DMs, texts, emails.
Communication overload, exactly. Juggling all those conversations, it can lead to that feeling of fatigue, where just stopping communication feels like the simplest way to cope.
Yeah, like mental exhaustion kicks in.
Right. The constant stream of messages, the pressure to respond, it can lead to a kind of burnout. Ghosting can become almost an impulsive reaction to feeling overwhelmed. And we can't forget that really weird phenomenon of orbiting that Delta Psychology mentions.
Oh yeah, orbiting, where they disappear but still watch your stories. So
Yeah.
creepy.
It's bizarre. They've ghosted you, cut off direct contact, but they're still interacting passively with your social media, liking posts, viewing stories, essentially staying in your digital orbit. It's incredibly confusing and can really prolong the hurt. Like, what does that even mean?
It's like a ghost haunting your feed. Ugh. But interestingly, as that British Vogue piece highlighted with anti-ghosting, it seems like dating apps are starting to maybe wake up to this issue.
Some are, yeah. They mention apps like Hinge with its Your Turn prompt, trying to nudge conversations along, and newer apps like Elate or Snack that are actively trying to discourage or even penalize ghosting.
So there's some movement.
There is. These initiatives, they're still pretty early days, but it shows a growing recognition within the industry that, hey, ghosting is a major pain point for users. How effective they'll be remains to be seen. But it feels like a step maybe in a more positive direction.
Yeah, it feels like we're at this point where ghosting is super common, but there's also this growing pushback, this anti-ghosting idea gaining some traction.
Exactly.
So if someone listening finds themselves on the receiving end of this silent treatment, what are some healthy ways they can cope? What does the research suggest?
Hey, yeah, the Delta Psychology article gives some really practical, helpful advice. First off, and this is key, allow yourself to actually feel the emotion.
Don't just brush it off.
Right. The hurt, the anger, the confusion, the sadness. Let it be there. Don't try to minimize it or tell yourself you shouldn't feel that way. And, crucially, Try really hard not to internalize the rejection.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. But keep reminding yourself. Being ghosted says way more about the other person's issues, their communication skills, their respect, maybe their own anxieties, than it does about your worth or desirability.
That's such an important reframe, shifting the focus off what's wrong with me to what's going on with them.
Mm.
What about getting that closure that ghosting denies you?
The article suggests actively creating your own closure. You can't rely on the ghoster for it, obviously.
So how do you do that?
One technique is writing a letter to the person who ghosted you. Pour out all your feelings, ask the questions you have, get it all down on paper. You don't have to send it. In fact, probably best not to.
Just the act of writing it is helpful.
Exactly. The very act of articulating those thoughts and feelings can be incredibly cathartic. Then, when you feel ready, make a conscious decision to let it go. Burn the letter, delete the file, whatever symbolizes release for you. It's about reclaiming control over your own healing narrative.
I really like that idea, taking back your agency in the situation. What about more practical steps, like right after it happens?
Definitely cut off contact, at least for a while. This is for your mental well-being. Unfollow them, mute them on social media. Remove those constant digital reminders. Seeing their posts or stories will likely just trigger more pain or confusion.
Protect your peace.
Absolutely. And lean on your support system. Talk to friends you trust, family, maybe even find an online support group if that feels right. Don't isolate yourself with these feelings.
Good advice. And self-care.
Super important. Practice consistent self-care and self-compassion. Do things that nourish you, that make you feel good, and actively challenge that negative self-talk that ghosting inevitably kicks up. Be kind to yourself.
And resist the urge to, ghost them back or get revenge.
Definitely resist that urge. Engaging in those behaviors, while maybe tempting in the moment, usually just keeps you stuck in the negativity. It doesn't actually help you heal or move forward. Focus on your own peace.
Right. It's about focusing on your healing, not getting bogged down in their actions or trying to retaliate. And once the initial sting fades a bit, the article mentions reflection.
Yes, when you feel ready, not straight away. Take some time to reflect. Not to blame yourself, again, but maybe to see if there are any potential red flags you missed, or to get clearer on what you do want and what you won't accept in future relationships. It can also be a chance to look at any deeper stuff the ghosting might have stirred up from your past. The goal isn't blame, it's learning and emerging stronger with clearer boundaries.
Okay, so moving beyond the individual experience, what about the broader ethical side of ghosting? Does society have a role here in maybe shifting these norms?
Oh, absolutely. The Delta Psychology article really digs into the ethics. It highlights that fundamentally, ghosting often shows a real lack of respect, empathy, and just basic honesty.
Yeah, basic courtesy feels missing.
Right. It's a departure from that. It often comes across as selfish, inconsiderate. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. Safety concerns, escaping genuinely abusive or harmful situations, ghosting can be necessary self-preservation then.
Of course, safety first.
But the vast majority of everyday ghosting, it's usually about convenience for the ghoster. And that raises big questions about, well, what kind of norms do we want for ending relationships, even casual ones? There's a risk of eroding trust and empathy more broadly if it becomes the default.
It really comes down to remembering there's another human being on the other side of that screen or silence, doesn't it? Their feelings matter, even if ending things is awkward for us.
Precisely. And the article notes that ghosters themselves can sometimes feel long-term guilt, and that cognitive dissonance we mentioned, they might feel it's wrong when it happens to them, but justify it when they do it.
Right, the double standard.
Yeah, so there's definitely a social responsibility aspect, promoting more empathy, more respect, maybe more open talk about healthy communication, how to end things kindly, and maybe even dating apps have a role in encouraging better behavior.
That old idea that silence is kinder really seems off base here then.
It really does in most cases. More often than not, honest communication, even if it's brief and maybe a bit uncomfortable, is ultimately more respectful than just vanishing.
It really just boils down to that golden rule, doesn't it? Treat others how you'd want to be treated. Okay, looking ahead then, what might the future hold for dating communication? Are we stuck in this ghosting cycle, or could things change?
Well, the Delta Psychology article offers some, speculative but interesting thoughts. One possibility is just increased awareness. The more we talk about ghosting and its impact, the more social disapproval might grow.
Making it less acceptable over time.
Potentially. We might also see a bigger emphasis on actually teaching communication skills for relationships, helping people learn how to end things respectfully even when it's tough.
And like we touched on, technology itself might evolve, right? Apps building in more anti-ghosting features?
Exactly. Maybe prompts to give a reason for unmatching, maybe even AI tools to help draft polite, not interested anymore messages. Who knows?
Huh? AI breakup assistance. That's a thought.
It is. We could also see the rise of things like slow dating movements gaining more traction, people intentionally slowing down, valuing quality over quantity. That might naturally lead to less ghosting if people are more invested from the start.
Like a backlash against the fast food feel of swiping.
Kind of, yeah. And as ghosting pops up in friendships, gaming, other online spaces, we might see new etiquette standards developing there too. Maybe even platforms having clearer guidelines about repeated ghosting being like a community violation.
So the hopeful outlook is a gradual shift towards clear, respectful communication becoming the norm again, replacing these silent exits.
That's the hope. A future where we prioritize kindness and clarity even in endings.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive today, ghosting. It's widespread, often really emotionally damaging, kind of a product of our times, psychological factors meeting technology.
hmm And while it's become somewhat normalized, maybe especially for younger generations, there is a growing awareness of the harm it causes. We're starting to see pushback, both socially and maybe even technologically.
And crucially, if you, our listener, have been ghosted,
Yeah.
please, please remember, it is absolutely not a reflection of your worth. Not at all. There are healthy ways to cope, to heal, and to move forward with your head held high.
Definitely. And finally, maybe something to think about. What small conscious changes could you personally make in your own communication, whether it's dating, friendships, even work stuff? How could you foster a bit more transparency, a bit more respect?
Yeah, how might those small shifts, if we all made them, maybe contribute to a bigger cultural change?
Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Maybe you've been ghosted, maybe you've done the ghosting. What was the impact? And what kind of communication do you really want to put out into the world moving forward?